I wouldn't say I'm feeling better today after last night's Sacramento Kings loss to the Washington Wizards, but maybe I'm in a better headspace to have more of a conversation about it. Thankfully, I don't have to do that alone. Jason Ross, longtime Sacramento Kings radio broadcaster, one of the hosts on SacTown Sports 1140 radio, and the former host of the Locked On Kings podcast, the OG of this podcast. Jay Ross joins me. We're going to talk about last night's loss, talk about the journey through this season, and we're even going to focus on if the Kings were to end up in the play-in round, is that a failure of a season? We'll discuss right here on Locked On Kings.
You are Locked On Kings, your daily Sacramento Kings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And now, ladies and gentlemen, it is that time for another episode of Locked On Kings.
Hello and welcome into Locked On Kings, your podcast hub for Sacramento Kings coverage all season long. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $200 if your bet wins. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn to get started. My name is Matt George. I have the privilege of being your host here. I'm a Sacramento sports anchor and reporter for ABC 10 News. I'm still angry. I'm still bothered by that Kings loss last night. Make no mistake about it. If you want to hear angry Matt George and you missed last night's podcast, go check that out. I screamed at a camera for 30 minutes. So if that's what you're looking for, you can get that fix over there. Today, it ended up being like I had already scheduled to have Jay Ross join me well before we knew the result of this Wizards game. And thank God I scheduled him. It could not come at a better time. Jason has a really professional ability to take these losses, to be frustrated as we all are, but to kind of break it down and look at it for what it is and not erupt like a little mentally fragile volcano like I do from time to time. So to have Jay Ross on today is actually really fun. We have a really good conversation regarding last night's game, just the state of this Kings team, what this season is really all about for Monte McNair and the Kings. And then a good chunk of this interview at the end is what I really want you to focus on, which is us talking about the Kings. If they end up being a play-in team, like, is that a failure, or what would happen in the postseason that would actually make this a tremendous success and stuff like that. There's really a fine margin between failure and success for the Kings this season, which is kind of what we get into. So I hope you enjoyed this full conversation with my good friend and the original host of Locked On Kings, Jason Ross. If last night's game was any indication, I didn't take it too well. Last night's loss, a tough loss on the Locked On Kings podcast. So this interview, this conversation with Jason Ross could not come at a better time. Jay Ross, the voice of reason, SacTown Sports 1140 from the morning show. Of course, longtime Sacramento Kings color commentator. Jay Ross, help me make sense of this loss last night, because even though we've seen losses like this before this season, based off of how the Kings have been playing, really a 5-game sample size before last night, I really believe that they were past something like this. And then here they are. It feels like every time they take 2-3 steps forward, it's one gigantic step back. A loss that not only sucks that you're losing to a team that had only won twice in their last 23 games, it's a loss that knocks you 2 spots down the standings that should not have happened. How do you make sense, or when you woke up this morning, how are you feeling about last night's loss?
Not any better today, that's for sure, Matt. And I appreciate you having me on. Yeah, I appreciate you calling me the voice of reason. And I would love to give you some like, oh, that makes sense. There's a profound answer. I don't think anybody has it. And I think even inside the game, trying to make it make sense, when the Kings were losing early, it's like, what are they doing? And then boom, here's that 18-0 run. Okay, good. They figured this out. They're only down 2 at half. They'll probably win this one by double digits. Second half, get hit again. Oh my gosh, they're going to lose. Oh, here they come. They take the fourth quarter lead. They're going to win this game. I don't know why they had to do this twice, but they're going to win. And then by the end, they played with fire too long, lost the game. And in an odd way, Matt, I would say some of the other terrible losses this year kind of made maybe some sense. This one didn't to me. Washington's not good. Mm-hmm. They didn't get a bunch of players back. They'd only beaten 2 teams above 500. This team sees the finish line. I didn't look at a team that went, Washington didn't make everything under the sun. They had a good night, but it didn't make sense. And I don't really have a great answer as to why it's still happening. And to your other point, literally, they had been playing better defensively. The night before, they had the perfect type of game on what you want to do in a game like that, where there was no mystery, handled their business, rested their starters. It's just been a puzzling year.
Should this bother them more than it looks like it does? And maybe it does, and they're just not showing it to us and making it public. But we saw the clip of Malik Monk leaving the game early in frustration, going into the tunnel before the final buzzer. And I guess some people have reacted negatively to that. I'm curious your reaction to that. Mine was good. Like, be pissed off. Go be pissed off, because I want to see somebody upset. I know De'Aaron Fox has kind of adapted this, whether call it a coping mechanism or just how he handles losses now. Because early in his career, J. Ross, you remember, after losses, De'Aaron would not be taking them well. And now he's to the point where he's straight up told us, like, as soon as I leave the arena, it's over and done with. And he doesn't let it bother him too much. But should this be bothering the Kings more? Because this is 4 losses to really, really bad teams. We're talking cellar of the Western and Eastern conferences: Washington, Charlotte, Portland, and there's one other that I'm missing, but Detroit. Like, these are games that it happens once or twice during the season. Okay, like, that happens. It's happening 4 times now, and in a playoff race that's likely going to come down to 1 game between the playoffs or the play-in, it just can't happen. Should this be bothering them more?
I think we'd like to see that. I don't know if there's a net win in that. I mean, I honestly don't know the answer to that. When you play 82, maybe it is healthier to move past. I know when they've got a great win, I like to celebrate that longer than, hey, they play again the next night. It's just not the way the league works. But I think we'd all like to see it. I honestly don't know if that will help them or not. But it's not only those 4 losses to me, because there's probably 6 to 8 others where they either had a big lead or there was maybe even a middle of the road team that was without 3 or 4 guys. So that's the thing. I'm like, you could even tell me, hey, you were going to lose to the Wizards and the Pistons. Those would be bad. But if you didn't have those others as well, it's really been a strange year. At times they've looked better, and at times they haven't. It's kind of, what day is it with them? And that's been the hardest part to figure out. But yeah, I have no issue if Malik left the court early. If he's mad, if he threw a chair, like, fine. But maybe others will be like, hey, relax. It's just a game. I don't know. I think each person has to be authentic to themselves in that.
Mike is a very I absolutely love the opportunity to interact with Mike Brown basically after every single game. And I've told him that before, privately pulled him aside, because his personality is phenomenal. What he brings to the table, I just think he's phenomenal to work with and phenomenal to cover. That being said, he's sometimes really tough to figure out, not just with his rotations and with, like, sometimes he'll have a short leash for one guy, but a long leash for another guy. Last night, the short leash was for Keon Ellis, who's been playing extremely well. But then there's Mike will show up after bad losses where I'm like, okay, Mike's going to be hot. And then he'll be like, yeah, tough loss. And then he'll show up after a win and be like, yeah, we got to play better. Like the New York Knicks win last year, where on national TV, the Kings beat the Knicks and he showed up and was more pissed post-game than I've ever seen him before. I'm trying to figure out if Mike is tactically doing this. And Mike has talked about, like, not wanting to, like, drag his play, or not wanting to put more pressure on his players. They know where their pitfalls have been, so it doesn't help anybody by him taking the podium and throwing guys under the bus and screaming necessarily. But like, I'm just having a hard time with Mike of what is acceptable and what is not acceptable about the consistent problems. I think that's the most concerning is these losses now, the 4 losses that I laid out about these bad losses. It's been 1 month, or it's been each month since December. One bad loss every single month since December. So this is spread out over the course of the season. This is not just a bad stretch. Like, this keeps happening. So what's acceptable and what's not acceptable from Mike Brown?
Yeah, and I think even last year, Matt, we saw him a little bit more quick trigger on timeouts. You know, there'd be like a 2-0, 4-0 run. Not even that. It'd be a defensive breakdown. He's like, timeout. You know, like, ooh, coach. Well, okay, clearly he doesn't like that, and he's not going to accept that. And it's not that he's accepting these losses, but I honestly think he doesn't know how to get them out of it. And I'm not saying that, hey, every coach should be able to figure this out. They've got a talented team. I've been stuck on this. They're good. They're chasing greatness. Last night doesn't make them great, but it drops you back down to, hey, maybe they're just barely good. Like, you know, just brings up so many more questions. And it's not exclusive to last night. It's not exclusive to Detroit or Charlotte or pick your game. And I think part of the reason, like you said it, Matt, I'm sure, and I said it and heard Mike Brown and De'Aaron and whoever else when they lost to maybe Charlotte 2 months ago. Well, this has got to be a lesson. What was it? Like, you have that to avoid last night. And that's part of the frustration, that those lessons, I guess, quote unquote, haven't been learned.
I just wonder how much we should be looking at the stars too, because I mean, Fox has had phenomenal moments this season. Domantas Sabonis is just having a phenomenal season, period. Domas is probably the guy that consistently has given us the most in terms of frustration after losses. Like, he's been the guy that's just been like, we got to play better. We can't be doing this. That being said, like, I thought Domantas Sabonis, he continued his double-double streak. I thought Domantas Sabonis was awful last night. Not just the fact that he turned the ball over 6 times. He shot, 9 times in a game where offensively you can't get going. You're scoring 34 points in the paint, and your superstar center is shooting the ball only 9 times. Like, and that's not the first time or second or third time even that's happened this season. But for this to keep happening, for the team to keep falling apart, losing games like this and running into the same, I think, mental hurdles just as much as physical, how much of that should be on the leadership of Fox and Sabonis? I have kind of a follow-up question to that too, but I'll start with that part.
Well, I always go to the players, to me, first and foremost. Coaches are part of all of this. Roster construction is a part of all of this. But on the night-to-night basis, I think it's how the players play. And if Fox and Sabonis were good last night, they would have won. Yeah. They weren't, to me. Sabonis, you're right. I mean, stats were there. I'm glad he kept the streak alive. Let's break a record. Those are all great things. And he's played really well this season. He was not that good last night. De'Aaron kind of worked his way to a good stat line, kind of. Not efficient, though. 30 shots, 6 steals. I love that. But 30 shots, no foul attempts. Took 15 twos, 15 threes. So he wasn't efficient. I feel like if those guys were on their game, I don't think we're having this conversation about last night's game. We're talking about a team that's still in 6th. I mean, that's how fragile this is. So they rely a lot on those two. And if those two aren't great, then the others have to be great. And that wasn't the case either. So all of that, and they still had a chance to beat a bad team on the road. So that's kind of where this team is. And I don't know if it would make a difference, honestly, if Fox or Sabonis just kind of in a huddle at one time, like, no, it's not going to be us. Let's get this together. I just don't think they're made that way. And sometimes you need someone that does that, but I don't know if the team entirely, maybe they would rally around that, but I don't look at them as not trying. I look at them as not performing, not executing. And I don't know how you get to that in a leadership way. I mean, you could put, it's a little bit like my analogy, I guess, and I don't know if this would be a good one, Matt, but earlier in the year when they were just awful at free throw shooting. And I could see both sides of that. I know they practice it. They practice it. Shoot 1,000 a day. All right. What if they shot 40% the next game? I mean, they practiced a ton. Do you ignore it? Maybe there's a thought in that, because I got to believe if all I'm told is I'm terrible at the foul line, the next time I'm at the line, I'm thinking about that. And I think the last thing you want to do is think about it. But, hey, don't practice it. Sometimes there's not an exact answer for some of these things.
Today's episode of the Locked On Kings podcast is brought to you by Nissan. Are you the kind of driver that likes to push things a little further? Ever wonder what adventure could be around the next corner? Our friends at Nissan have a lineup of SUVs with the capabilities to take your adventure to the next level. The 2024 Nissan Rogue is perfection. We're talking about a perfect city drive and great escape vehicle. Classic exclusive Google is built in as your always updating assistant to call on for almost anything. Gone are the days of connecting your phone. Keep it separate. You have Google Assistant, Google Maps, and Google Play right built into that 12.3-inch HD touchscreen infotainment system actually in the vehicle. The 2024 Rogue is the perfect midsize crossover for your next adventure. Or maybe you're looking for something different. How about the 2024 Nissan Armada? It will change what you expect from a full-size SUV. Picture a rugged 4x4 that can seat up to 8 in first-class luxury and style. You can tow bigger and explore further in the 2024 Armada. Take the Nissan Rogue, Nissan Armada, or the Nissan Pathfinder and go find your next big adventure. Shop NissanUSA.com. Today's episode of the Locked On Kings podcast is also brought to you by FanDuel. Say goodbye to busted brackets because FanDuel lets you bet On every game of the NCAA tournament, whether you're betting on a big upset or a 1 seed, it's time to go dancing on America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. That's $200 to use on point spreads, on money lines. You can even pick who's going to win it all. And of course, in addition to all of the fun March Madness betting that you can do, there's plenty of betting in revolving the Sacramento Kings. Like, let's look at the FanDuel odds right now for the Kings to make the playoffs and for the Kings to make the play-in. Well, the Kings are a -420 outright on FanDuel right now to make the playoffs. They are plus 310 not to make the playoffs. So FanDuel is expecting the Kings to actually make the playoffs in some capacity. But interesting enough, amongst the Phoenix Suns, Dallas Mavericks, and of course, New Orleans Pelicans, the Sacramento Kings have the worst odds, or should I say best odds, to make the play-in tournament. So there's kind of a positive and negative way to look at that. The positive way is FanDuel expects that the Kings are more likely to make at least the play-in than any other team that the Kings are competing with. The bad news is FanDuel also thinks the Kings are most likely to be a play-in team. So it all depends on your perspective, but you can bet on that. You can bet on Malik Monk winning Sixth Man of the Year, although the odds on that are really high, meaning you're not going to get the best of payouts for that right now. Hey, maybe that's where you use your $5 bet, right? Put $5 on Malik Monk to win Sixth Man of the Year. You'll win $200 in bonus bets when that hits. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon. Bet on college hoops and the NBA until they cut down the nets. Yeah, my follow-up question had to do with Fox's and Sabonis's leadership styles, because I think it's a very broad and unfair question to just bluntly put, like, is their leadership style a problem? But Mike Brown shared a story with us a couple of months ago. I can't remember. It was after a post-game press conference, and he was talking about his early days coaching young LeBron in Cleveland. And he was talking about a situation where they had practiced something defensively and it just was not working in a game early on in the season. And he called the timeout and said, guys, what do you want to do? Should we do something different? And LeBron stepped up, young LeBron stepped up and said, like, F that. This is what we practice. This is what we're going to do. And he pointed at different guys and said, you're going to do this. You're going to do this. You're going to do this. And Mike said that Cavaliers team that year was one of the best defensive teams in the league. So that's a one-game circumstance. We're also talking about LeBron freaking James, but does De'Aaron, does Sabonis need to, at some point when things are unraveling like that, if Mike Brown takes a timeout, or even if he doesn't, and we saw a couple times actually Domas pull the guys together.
Yeah.
And so that might be happening, but does there need to be more of, guys, we've done this way too many times. Stop it. You do this, you do this, you do this. Let's figure this out. Because on the court, we're seeing these big runs, 18-0, 15-0 last night. So they're able to turn something around, but I just need to see more to stop it from getting out of control. And I know Deuce Mason has talked about that a lot. You guys have talked about that a lot on the broadcast too. It's not just that the Kings are going on the wrong side of 10-4 runs. It's 20-4, 16-2. It's these massive runs that completely swing a game quickly. They keep happening. So is Sabonis or Fox, one of them need to, while it's happening, go, everybody, calm down, knock it off, get back to what we do, because this team can't hang with us.
Yeah, I think what that happens there is, my best read on this is, part of their strength is they're kind of a read and react, free-flowing offense. I think there's some charm in that. But I think when they get into those, when it's starting to go south, maybe it turns into a little bit more, I'll fix it. And sometimes De'Aaron can, which is great. De'Aaron can end any run sometimes. But if he's not, and he's taking maybe an ill-advised shot, or they're hurried, or it's a bad shot, then all of a sudden, wow, this was 7-0, but now it's 13-0 or whatever. I think that run extends. So I would kind of implore them to maybe even run a play or something that makes more logical sense. I think sometimes they're a little guilty of trying to work it out like individually instead of as a team. So, it's a weird team. Again, I'm kind of back to, I should have an answer, or these guys should have an answer. I just don't feel like they do in a lot of these questions.
Earlier on, you talked about you wouldn't say that they're not trying. And I agree with you 100%. And again, these big runs that are happening are indications of they are absolutely trying. It's just they're starting to try, or they're waking up a little bit too late, or whatever the case may be. But like I look at last night in particular, like I look at the shot selection. There was a play J. Ross, in the fourth quarter that made me literally like just throw my hands in the air and go, what are we doing here? It was the Kings had a 5-on-4 advantage after a Wizards player, I think it was Corey Kispert or someone, went down. Like he got a little banged up. He ended up being fine, but he was down and stayed on the ground for a while. The Kings go back the other way, 5-on-4 opportunity. No one even comes remotely close to touching the paint, and they settle for a Chris Duarte pretty contested 3-point shot. To me, that has nothing to do with what the Wizards did defensively. That has everything to do with you didn't put in the effort, or you didn't put in the work to exploit one of the easiest mismatches you're going to get, which is somebody go inside, draw the defense in, get a better, if the 3-point shot is what you want, fine. You can get a better one than a contested Chris Duarte 3. It has nothing to do with Chris. It has everything to do with it's a contested look. So that, to me, that play was an indication of, and the fact that the Kings took so many threes last night, and a vast majority of them were off of like one dribble pull-ups, not paint touches, which is what Mike speaks so much about. To me, that has everything to do with, it's not that the Kings aren't trying, it's just the Kings weren't putting in the work to play their game. They were just settling for this hero ball. And like you said, I'm going to fix it, not let's get back into the game as a team. They played about 10 minutes of really, really good team basketball. Over those 10 minutes, they dominated the Wizards. Everything else was just chuck and pray. And it doesn't make any sense to me.
Yeah, the Duarte shot, I know the exact play you're talking about. I made a note of it while it's happening. I'm like, I can't believe this just happened. The only way that should have happened was if somehow the Wizards played the most incredible 4-on-5 defense, got the 5th player back, and then it was a grenade for Duarte because the shot clock got late and, okay, just got to throw it up with 2 seconds. That was not the case. It was 5-on-4. They didn't space the floor well. They had numbers, and it just was not a very good offensive sequence at all. And so they've been guilty of that. The other one that, the team really stands by this, and the phrase this year is the spray 3. So get to the paint, throw it out, get the spray 3. I know I've heard numbers like they wanted to hit or shoot 40 threes a game. We're a good shooting team. That's the stuff, or a great shooting team. I don't know that they're a great shooting team. I think they're good. And some nights they're falling, but there's plenty of nights where it's fine. We get about 10, 15, 12. Great. Like, I just don't think they're great at that. I think they're good at that. And so I think there's maybe a little bit of an identity thought there. Like, I mean, one of the big offseason deals was to get Sasha Vezenkov. Now, he hasn't played that much, but when he's been out there, there's been moments, again, good, not great. Malik can get as hot as anybody. De'Aaron, there was a stretch where, man, De'Aaron's hitting 7 threes a night. What's going on with him? No, that's not happened all year. Off and on for Lyle. I just think you go across the board, and I think they're a good 3-point shooting team. A little bit like the team. They're good. They're not great. And so I think maybe offensive philosophy is maybe a little bit off too with the team.
Interesting. That's a interesting. I mean, I think
you just agree, or am I off on that?
No, I think this team is far too reliant on the 3-point shot.
Right.
Now,
because you don't believe that they're good at it.
I think on paper, they have a lot of weapons that in theory should be able to knock down a high volume of threes. Where I agree with you is this Kings team struggles to get 2 of them or more on the same page on the same night. Like, typically it's one guy getting really, really hot. You mentioned Fox in the season. Monk's done that at times. Keegan Murray went for 40 earlier on this season and couldn't miss from 3-point range. Typically it's one guy that goes supernova, but everybody else, like the Kings haven't had too many games this season. There've been a few and they've obviously won those games, but where almost everybody was getting involved in the party and knocking down 3-point shots. But clearly, as the playoffs indicated last year, that's not a recipe for success because the Kings couldn't hit water if they fell out of the boat from 3-point range for most of that 7-game series against Golden State. So, and maybe that's to Mike Brown's point. Mike's talking about we need to know and need to learn how to win games with our defense when shots aren't falling. It's almost like he's mentally preparing for games where it's famine, not feast from 3-point range. But I actually agree with you. I just hadn't thought from that perspective because I think the Kings are supposed to be a great 3-point shooting team based off their personnel, but they're not.
Yeah, and I think, and pardon me, I don't have the numbers in front of me, but I remember looking a little while back, Matt, and the highest percentage at one point, the most consistent has been Barnes, and we haven't even mentioned him. And I think of him as he's fine as a 3-point shooter, but I would go Lyles, Sasha, Malik, Keegan. What a year he had last year. Oh, Fox is having it stretches. Even Sabonis will knock down maybe 1 a game, 2 every other game. But yeah, it's Davion here and there, Duarte here and there, but none of them like, man, that guy's locked in all year. This makes this a lethal offense from three. They're all pretty good at it.
Today's episode of the Locked On Kings podcast is brought to you by BetterHelp. Sometimes we all need the opportunity just to get something off of our chest. Big or small, certain things in life can really start to get to you. It's important to let that out, especially to someone who's unbiased on your life. So today, I want to make sure I express to you the significance of mental health, taking that seriously, and giving therapy a try. I've talked about this before. Therapy is something that I started going and seeing and doing for myself, taking care of myself more mentally during the pandemic. And I have kept it up religiously over the past 3 to 4 years, and I'm tremendously better for it. It doesn't fix all your problems, right? Sometimes it can feel more like a band-aid than a miracle worker. Therapists are humans too, but their job is to listen to you, help provide a different perspective, and help you work through some of the things in life that could be small or could be massive things. There's no problem that is too big or too small for therapy. We all have our different situations. We all need to talk through those situations. That's what therapy does for you. And look, sometimes therapy can be hard to get started, can be kind of scary, kind of intimidating. That's where BetterHelp comes in. Therapy is different for everybody. Most of us have bigger problems than our favorite sports teams letting us down like the Kings did in Washington last night, right? If you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online. It's designed to be flexible and suited to your schedule, help you get connected with different licensed therapists, and you can change your therapist at any time. If you're not vibing with them or don't have a connection with them, you can change it. BetterHelp's not going to charge you or penalize you for that. Visit BetterHelp.com/LockedOnNBA. Get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/LockedOnNBA. Well, with the loss last night, J. Ross, the Kings dropped down to 8th. Now, they're only half a game back of the Suns in 7th, and the Suns in 7th are tied technically with the Mavs in 6th, but the Mavs have the tiebreaker. So it's not the end of the world, right? We've seen them respond to bad losses. They take on Orlando tomorrow. They could win that game and be right back in the mix. They have 2 games coming up against the Dallas Mavericks. Those games are a mini playoff series in itself based off of this situation. But as of right now, the Kings are sitting in the play-in spot. And I mean, there's a very real chance looking at the schedule and games against Boston, the Clippers, the Suns, the Pelicans again. There's a lot of tough games coming up on this schedule. There's a good chance that this Kings team could enter the playoffs as a play-in team. I think a lot of Kings fans are going to chalk that up to a failure. And I can relate to some of that, or I can feel like you go from the 3rd seed to a play-in team, regardless of how much better the West got. Like that feels like a steeper drop maybe than it actually is. If you're looking at going from a 3rd seed to an 8th seed, that's a pretty steep drop in itself too. But how do you, maybe this might not be a possible question to ask because we still need some context, but how would you feel about looking from 10,000 feet up, the Kings, regardless of what happens in the play-in? We get to the very last day of the season and we know, okay, it's going to be the Kings and the Suns in the opening round of the play-in. The Suns are the 7th seed, the Kings are the 8th seed. Man, that is a failure, or okay, that's fine.
I mean, there's so many layers to that, right? I mean, I think it would 100% of that would depend on probably the next steps, right? Do they get through the play-in? Then you're a playoff team. Then it's kind of, you could almost make the argument, what if they won a home game as a play-in and they moved on as the 7th seed or an 8? Like, that's kind of cool. We would have taken that for many years. I'm not saying you resort to that, but I wouldn't deny, though, that if it was game 82 and you're playing Portland and somehow you lost in that theme of the year and lost game 82 and dropped to 7 to be in the 7-8, that would feel disappointing. But then, like, my next point would be if you then beat team 8 and you hosted, or you weren't hosting, but you were team 7, now you're in the playoffs and you actually won the series, I wouldn't even care about the regular season.
Sure.
So it feels like way more context, but there's a lot of ways to go there. I don't know how it wouldn't feel slightly disappointing, but I've also been on this thought a little bit. I think we really maybe are guilty of, and myself included, comparing this year to last year too much, in this sense that there's a chance, Matt, that the Kings could win the exact same amount of games at 48 and be 7 or 8. I doubt 9, but let's say 7 or 8. And some people would say failure, and that I can't tell them how to think. But the West is clearly better. And if we say, and we've got a handful of games to rip them apart for, injuries, not more than last year, but nothing like major detrimental, but they've had more injuries. and the West is clearly better, you could almost argue their season is more impressive in a weird way. It would take some work to argue it, but if we would agree that the West is better, that they got to there with more obstacles and they had 10 games that they could go, my gosh, wake up and you've got 55 wins. They're better. That you could argue that they're better. So I don't know that I feel like we're punishing them a little bit, probably fairly, because the West is better. But I don't know that they should be punished in that typical way as a failure of like, okay, so what if they finish 7th with 48 wins? Oh, yeah, they were 3rd last year. Well, it was a little bit my argument last year. Well, the 3 and the 6, the difference was like 2 games.
Right.
So when you're 48 wins and the 8th team, I think, had 45, are you really better? I mean, are you really that much better? Whereas if the 1 seed ran away with it this year, or if the 1 seed was Boston in the West, it's like, that's the best team this year.
Right.
Now, I don't know if they're going to win the championship. They had the best regular season. That's a difference between 1 and 8. This year, there's not that much of a difference.
Yeah, I understand completely what you're saying. I think my pushback, or what my reaction is, and I think a lot of Kings fans would probably echo this is the bed you kind of made for yourself.
Absolutely.
Like you went through 2 trade deadlines and an offseason where you said, we're running it back. We're sticking with what we have. So those were 3 opportunities for you to make changes. You didn't make changes. And like you said, perspective wise, you could say, given the circumstances, us reaching the same win total feels like improvement. But in what matters, which is the standings and is winning and is building towards a championship contender, which those are the words that we weren't using. Those were the words that Mike Brown and De'Aaron Fox were using coming into the season. You didn't go anywhere. Maybe you in some ways you took minuscule little steps forward. In other ways, you took steps back.
Sure.
I think that's where Kings fans, and this is something I've talked about a lot, Jay Ross. I'm curious your perspective on it. This might be a year when, and hopefully when we're breaking down the Kings' journey to a championship in 2 years or whatever it may be, this might be the year that from 10,000 to 50,000 feet up, we look at this year and we summarize it. Last year was the return, the renaissance, the dawn of the beam. This year might be for lack of a better term, separating the boys from the men of, okay, we know now after this season, the context of which guys we want to bring with us further in this journey and which guys aren't going to cut it. That might be what this year is about. You just hope that's not a lost year when Malik Monk's on the last year of his contract and De'Aaron Fox and Domantas Sabonis are now another year older. They're still in their prime. They're fine. Sure. They're not old necessarily, but I wonder if this is what this year is about, was just kind of figuring out who are the dogs and who's the pup.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I think there's a lot in this whole argument or this conversation. So my thought on a couple things here would be, I agree on they made this bed, right? Like there's not a guarantee if you make trades, you got better. We can point out some cases it worked, some it didn't. I was one I thought they would. I really thought they would. I thought there'd be something actually kind of significant. It didn't happen. So now you deal with that. And that could be anywhere from more wins than last year to less wins than last year. I would argue if they won 2 more games and won 42 this year, it'll be disappointing. Let's say drop them to the 10 seed, but they won a round. It's more successful. Like
absolutely
oddly weird. Like everybody, because their goal was to improve on last year.
Yes.
One of that is regular season wins. Sure. If that's not done, to me, it more importantly is playoff wins. So if you kept the same team, you had less wins than last year, and you're out in the first round or out in the play-in, it's a worse year. I don't know how any other way you can put it that way. But you made that bed. That's your roster. But I think no matter what, let's even give them a pie in the sky. I don't even care regular season where they finish, but let's give them a round win, maybe even a good second-round series. I still think it's been defined that this roster's not it. And that doesn't mean a Fox, Sabonis, Murray, Monk blow up, but maybe. But it's kind of I don't think it's it. And it doesn't have to be defined that this is the championship team, because I think it's clearly not. But they're closer to that. I don't think they're not a lottery team to me. But what is it? I mean, you have a bad offseason. You don't make another move. You make the wrong move and you go backwards. That's the worst thing they could do. So I think they've clearly seen that, okay, we did get a good run at this for 2 years. The come up year is the best year. This year has not been as enjoyable. But I think to your point, you boarded it perfectly, kind of who you're going to build around. I think everything has to be a fact-finding mission. I believe if they haven't figured it out, I think looks like we have. I mean, I think they know that this isn't going to cut it.
Yeah, Monty is in for I think a busy and I think all eyes and a lot of pressure is going to be on Monty this upcoming offseason, but there's still a lot of context to gather before we get there. We'll wrap up with this, J. Ross. You're 100% correct. If the Kings win a playoff series, like all of this is a kind of a moot point. And hopefully that is the case. I'm also like, I think the NBA has been consistently trending in more of a direction of the regular season matters less and less and less. So I want to be careful because I think this regular season and for the development of the Kings is tremendously important and can't be ignored. But again, if the Kings win a playoff series, regardless of the competition, it's like, well, the regular season had its ups and downs, but ultimately, hey, look where the Kings are in the postseason. Yeah. So I kind of feel that way. But De'Aaron Fox made a joke, and it's a joke that all of us, I know your co-host, Carmichael Davis, made it. We've talked about this so many times, not just over the last 2 years, feels like over the last 20, playing to the level of your competition. Fox made the joke of, okay, if that's the case, the good news is in the playoffs, we're going to be playing good teams, not bad teams. So there's like a blessing and a curse to it. Should we kind of feel that way? Because I feel like I'm not saying that these Kings problems aren't going to be exploited by smart, good, top of the line teams. Because if the Kings are a 7th or 8th seed, they're taking on the best of the West. But I have more confidence for the Kings against the Thunder or the Nuggets or even the Clippers to some extent than I do against the Wizards or the Pistons or the Spurs or whoever at this point in time. And I don't know if that's wounded King syndrome or if that's like a legitimate character trait of this Kings team.
Yeah, I mean, I think where we would get to with that is we would feel less pain if, let's give them a team, you said Thunder. They get the Thunder in the first round and the Thunder beat them in 6 games. We're all disappointed because the season ended, but you go, well, the Thunder are pretty good. They had a good year. You can rationalize it more than how did they lose to the Pistons at home? How did they lose to those are harder for us to comprehend. But your initial point that you said in there, I think, is kind of what De'Aaron and maybe others might be thinking incorrectly on is, yeah, I believe they'll be ready. They'll be coached. They'll scheme, all that. But the season-long worth of problems don't go away.
Yeah.
And right now they fixed free throw shooting. It's better. I would not be stunned if game 2 of a series, like, wow, they missed 12 free throws tonight. How do you explain it? Because they did that during the year. Wow, they blew a 20-point lead in the third quarter. Who saw that coming? Well, we did, because that's happened. It might have happened to the, Hornets, but it's happening tonight in a playoff game when it matters more. So I think the things that you do during the year are really who you are. But in that same sentence, then it's, man, did you see what they did to the Milwaukee Bucks? How do they win in Minnesota twice? They've smashed Dallas and so they're capable of all of these things. And that's what I think this year is as a head scratcher. I mean, I don't think it does feel crazy to see them going far. It just feels like it is because of the wounded animal and what we've seen them do in a negative way. But when they've been good, they've been pretty darn good, even with some flaws on their roster and flaws in who they can be. So they're a tough one to figure out. I mean, all this we've talked about, and it's like, I don't know. I don't know about these guys.
It's a different level of stress, but something that will take meaningful games in March and April compared to where we were. I know regardless of the ups and downs, you and G-Man have been having a blast on the radio call. It's been a really fun 2-year, at least kind of mini stretch that this team has turned themselves around. So keep up the great work, of course, over there on the Kings radio broadcast on SacTown Sports 1140 in the morning with Carmichael Dave. All the amazing stuff you do, of course, calling Sac State football as well when football season comes back around. Stingers up. I appreciate you, J. Ross. Thank you so much for coming back on the Locked On Kings podcast, which again, if you didn't know, J. Ross started this podcast. He was the OG, and I stole it from him. I snatched it from him like the
you elevated it. You've taken, look at this. We're on video, looking sharp. You're getting people following you all the time. You got numbers. You're crushing it.
You didn't see the podcast last night of me in a multi-$1,000 television news studio screaming at a camera in frustration because I can't comprehend a loss to the Washington Wizards again. So it's
accurate. I mean, how do you explain that?
I don't know.
I was, as you're saying that, you were talking about Dave's very emotional. He's always all over the place. But I think, I for whatever reason, a strength or a weakness, I have the ability though, every night entering that building, like they could have just lost 5 in a row. Like the music will start, the song that you and I look and make magic eyes to when we hear dun, dun, dun. It's like we're here, like something special could happen. And I know like next week, the 2 games against Dallas are going to be so energetic.
Oh, yeah.
High stress, but I love it. I hope there's postseason games. It's like you live for this stuff. As miserable as some of this has been this year, there's still some good stuff ahead.
Oh, I will take all of this. Even the lowest of the lows this season have been nothing compared to the lows that we've experienced over the last 2 decades with this Kings team too. So we'll take this every day of the week. J. Ross, I appreciate you so much. I'd have you on every day of the week if I could here on the podcast, but we'll settle for every once in a while when I can grab you. It won't be the last time. Hopefully we're previewing a Kings playoff series together coming up in the near future, but I appreciate you, my friend. I'll see you soon. Enjoy the rest of the ride this year. Hang on tight, and we'll see you for the 76ers and the Mavericks coming up.
Sounds good. Thanks, Matt.